Jochi did not die in battle. He died in a tent, hundreds of miles from his father, on a winter night in 1227. The cause of death was never officially recorded. Some sources suggest illness. Others hint at hunting accidents. A few whisper assassination. But what killed Jochi was not a weapon or a disease. It was the slow disintegration of identity. The realization that betrayal does not end with the act. It continues, in silence, in isolation, in the space between what was promised and what was delivered. This is what actually happened. When Genghis Khan looked at his eldest son, he did not see himself. He saw doubt. Jochi was born in 1182, approximately 9 months after Berta, Genghis Khan's wife, was kidnapped by the Merkits. She was held captive for 8 months. When she was rescued, she was pregnant. The child she bore was Jochi. His name means guest in Mongolian. That name was not accidental. It was a designation. From birth, Jochi's legitimacy was questioned. Not openly, not constantly, but persistently. In Mongol culture, lineage determined everything. Property rights, succession claims, military authority, all flowed from verified bloodline. Jochi's bloodline was not verified. It was debated. Genghis Khan publicly acknowledged Jochi as his son. He granted him territories. He assigned him military commands. He included him in family councils. But acknowledgement is not the same as certainty. And in private moments, when decisions about succession were discussed, Jochi's name was always accompanied by hesitation. This hesitation was not hidden from Jochi. He lived with it. Every promotion came with unspoken questions. Every military success was evaluated against his brother's achievements. Every council meeting included glances that measured his resemblance to his father. He was included in the family, but never fully integrated into it. And that gap, that space between inclusion and belonging, became the foundation of everything that followed. By 1210, Genghis Khan had unified the Mongol tribes and begun expanding westward. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. His sons were assigned territories to govern. Chagatai received Central Asia. Urgadai was positioned for central administration. Tolui, the youngest, was designated to inherit the Mongol heartland according to tradition. Jochi was given the western territories, the lands furthest from the capital, the regions most recently conquered, the areas where Mongol authority was least established. This was presented as an honor, a vast territory to govern. But distance is not always privilege. It can also be exile. Jochi moved west to administer the steppes north of the Caspian Sea. He established his Ordu, his mobile court, in the region that would later be called the Golden Horde. He governed populations that were not fully integrated into Mongol administration. He managed territories that were still being defined. He operated hundreds of miles from his father's court, and in that distance, something shifted. Jochi's western territories bordered the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast Islamic state that controlled modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. The Khwarezmian Shah, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, governed a wealthy empire built on Silk Road trade. His cities were prosperous. His armies were substantial. His court was sophisticated. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan of 450 merchants to establish commercial relations with Khwarezm. The governor of the border city of Otrar, suspicious of the caravan's intentions, accused the merchants of espionage and had them executed. Their goods were confiscated. When Genghis Khan demanded restitution, the Khwarezmian Shah refused and executed the Mongol ambassador. This was not a diplomatic incident. It was a declaration. Genghis Khan prepared for full-scale invasion. He assembled an army of approximately 100,000 to 150,000 soldiers. He divided his forces into multiple columns. He assigned his sons to command divisions. Jochi was given command of the northern flank. His objective was to advance through the Sir Darya Valley and capture the cities along that route. Among those cities was Urgench, the wealthiest city in the Khwarezmian Empire. In 1220, Jochi's forces reached Urgench. The city was massive. Its population exceeded 100,000. Its walls were fortified. Its defenders were prepared. Mongol strategy for sieges was systematic. Surround the city, cut off supply lines, offer terms of surrender. If refused, assault. If the city resisted, destroy it completely as a message to other cities. This was the pattern that had been followed at Bukhara, at Samarkand, at Merv. Jochi surrounded Urgench. He cut off the supply lines. But he did not immediately assault. According to Persian historians, including Juzjani and Rashid al-Din, Jochi delayed the siege. He engaged in negotiations with city leaders. He offered terms that were more favorable than standard Mongol ultimatums. He suggested that if the city surrendered, its population would be spared and its infrastructure preserved. This was not standard procedure, and it was noticed. Genghis Khan, receiving reports from the siege, questioned the delay. He sent messages demanding acceleration. When those messages were not immediately acted upon, he reassigned the siege. Chagatai and Ogadai were dispatched to take command alongside Jochi. The brothers did not cooperate smoothly. Sources describe disputes over strategy. Chagatai advocated for immediate assault and complete destruction, according to standard Mongol protocol. Jochi argued for negotiated surrender to preserve the city's economic value. The disagreement escalated. According to Rashid al-Din's Jami al-Tawarik, written in the early 14th century, Chagatai openly accused Jochi of treason. He suggested that Jochi was planning to preserve Urgench because he intended to rule it independently. He claimed Jochi was negotiating with Khwarezmian officials not as a Mongol commander, but as a potential sovereign. These accusations reached Genghis Khan. The siege of Urgench finally proceeded in April 1221 after the spring flood subsided. It lasted 5 months. The city was taken house by house. When it finally fell, the Mongols diverted the Amu Darya River through the city, flooding it. The population was massacred. The infrastructure was destroyed. Urgench was eliminated as a functioning city, but the damage to Jochi's position was already done. After Urgench, Jochi was not given another major command. He was recalled to his western territories. He was not included in the final campaigns against the Khwarezmian Shah. He was not present when Genghis Khan pursued the Shah across Persia to his death on an island in the Caspian Sea. He was administratively sidelined, and he understood why. The accusation had been made. Whether true or false, it had entered the record. And in Mongol political culture, where legitimacy was already fragile, accusations did not need proof to have consequences. They only needed repetition. What actually happened at Urgench remains contested. Some historians argue Jochi was genuinely planning to establish an independent khanate. They point to his extended negotiations, his favorable surrender terms, his resistance to his brother's commands. They suggest he saw an opportunity to create a sovereign state that would not be questioned about his bloodline because it would be built on his own conquests. Other historians argue Jochi was simply exercising military pragmatism. Urgench was valuable. Destroying it eliminated a major economic center that could have generated tribute for the Mongol Empire. Preserving it would have been strategically advantageous. His negotiations were not betrayal. They were strategy. But in Genghis Khan's empire, the distinction between strategic autonomy and treason was not determined by the actor's intent. It was determined by the Khan's interpretation. And Genghis Khan interpreted Jochi's actions as insufficiently subordinate. After 1221, The relationship between father and son deteriorated. Jochi remained in his western territories. He did not return to the imperial court. He did not participate in the Mongol invasion of the Jin dynasty in northern China. He did not attend family councils. Sources from this period describe increasing isolation. Jochi governed his territories, but he did not communicate regularly with the central administration. Messages were sent, but responses were delayed. Requests were made, but approvals were withheld. By 1223, the separation had become formalized. Jochi was administering a semi-autonomous region, but that autonomy was not officially recognized. He had authority over his territories, but that authority was not confirmed by his father. He was functioning as a Khan, but he was not acknowledged as one. This ambiguity was not sustainable. In governance, uncertainty is more dangerous than restriction. Restriction can be navigated. Uncertainty prevents planning. And Jochi was living in permanent uncertainty. He could not make long-term decisions because his authority might be revoked. He could not establish succession plans for his own sons because his position might not be inheritable. He could not negotiate independently with neighboring states because his sovereignty was not recognized. He was trapped in a role that was simultaneously too much authority to be a subordinate and too little authority to be autonomous. And that trap was contracting. In 1226, Genghis Khan began preparing for his final campaign against the Western Jia dynasty. He summoned his sons to join the campaign. Jochi did not come. The reason given was illness. Genghis Khan did not accept this explanation. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the primary Mongolian historical source, compiled in the 1240 seconds, Genghis Khan began questioning whether Jochi was actually ill or simply refusing to obey. Reports reached him that Jochi was seen hunting in the steppes. If he was well enough to hunt, he was well enough to campaign. Genghis Khan reportedly considered sending forces to compel Jochi's attendance. Some sources suggest he considered stripping Jochi of his territories entirely. Others hint he considered more permanent solutions. But before any action was taken, news arrived in the winter of 1227. Jochi had died. The timing was convenient. Too convenient for some historians. The cause of death was never specified. The location was remote. The witnesses were limited. No body was returned to the central court for burial. No formal mourning period was observed. The death was simply reported, acknowledged, and administratively processed. Jochi's sons, Batu and Orda, inherited his western territories. They continued governing the region that would become the Golden Horde. They expanded Mongol control across the steppes. They participated in the invasions of Eastern Europe in the 1230 seconds and 1240 seconds. They became powerful Khans in their own right, but they governed under a cloud. The question of their grandfather's legitimacy followed them. The accusation of their father's betrayal shadowed their administration. They were included in the empire, but never fully trusted within it. And this mistrust had consequences. When Ogedai was selected as Genghis Khan's successor in 1229, Jochi's line was excluded from consideration. When the empire was formally divided among Genghis Khan's descendants, Jochi's portion was defined as the westernmost, and therefore the most peripheral. When disputes arose between different branches of the family, Jochi's descendants were consistently outvoted. The betrayal at Urgench, whether real or perceived, had been archived. And archives outlast individuals. The Golden Horde would eventually become the most powerful of the Mongol successor states. It would control the trade routes between Europe and Asia. It would dominate Russia for 2 centuries. It would generate wealth that exceeded the other Khanates. But it would never be recognized as the senior branch of the family. It would always be positioned as the distant cousin, the peripheral relative, the questionable lineage. And this positioning had roots. Those roots extended back to a siege in 1221, to accusations made by a brother, to a father's silence, to a son's isolation, to a death that was reported but never explained. Jochi never publicly admitted betrayal. He never confessed to planning independence. He never acknowledged doing anything other than governing the territories assigned to him. But he also never successfully defended himself. He never returned to court to contest the accusations. He never reconciled with his father. He never secured his position. He lived the last 6 years of his life in functional exile, and he died without resolution. Whether Jochi actually betrayed Genghis Khan depends on how betrayal is defined. If betrayal means actively conspiring with enemies, there is no evidence. If betrayal means refusing direct orders, the record is ambiguous. If betrayal means prioritizing regional interests over imperial unity, the case becomes stronger. But if betrayal means losing the confidence of the person whose confidence determined your entire existence, then Jochi betrayed his father completely, not through action, through distance. The distance that began at birth with a name that meant guest. The distance that widened with every unspoken question about his legitimacy. The distance that solidified when he was assigned the furthest territories. The distance that became permanent when he hesitated at Urgench. That distance was not chosen by Jochi. It was assigned to him, but he could not escape it. And when he tried to navigate it by governing effectively, by preserving economically valuable cities, by building his own power base in the West, that navigation was interpreted as confirmation of exactly what everyone had always suspected, that he was not truly part of the family, that he was not truly Mongol, that he was, as his name suggested, a guest, and guests can be removed. Genghis Khan died in August 1227, 6 months after Jochi. He was campaigning against the Western Shah when he fell from his horse and sustained injuries that led to his death. Before he died, he finalized his succession plan. Urgedai would become Great Khan. Chagatai would govern Central Asia. Tului would inherit the Mongol heartland. Jochi's line would keep the Western territories, but the Western territories would remain peripheral. The succession document, as recorded by multiple Persian and Chinese sources, did not mention Jochi by name. It referred only to the sons of the eldest, not the eldest son himself, his sons. He had been administratively erased and replaced by his descendants in a single phrase. This was Genghis Khan's final judgment on his eldest son. Not execution, not exile, substitution. Jochi's identity was replaced by his function. His person was replaced by his territory. His name was replaced by a geographical designation. He continued to exist in the empire's records, but only as an administrative category. This is what betrayal cost him. Not his life, though that came soon enough. He became illegible to his father, to his brothers, to the empire he had helped build. He became a question mark in the succession documents, a footnote in the historical sources, a contested figure whose actions could not be definitively categorized because his identity had never been definitively established. And perhaps that was the real betrayal, not what Jochi did at Urgench, but what was done to him from birth, the creation of a son whose legitimacy was always conditional, whose belonging was always provisional, whose authority was always contestable. And then the expression of shock when that son, living under those conditions, began behaving in ways that suggested he might want something more stable, something less conditional, something that did not require constant proof of loyalty to a family that never stopped questioning whether he belonged to it. Jochi did not betray Genghis Khan at Urgench. He simply stopped performing certainty about a relationship that had never been certain, and that performance, once broken, could not be restored. The Mongol Empire would continue expanding for decades after both men died. It would become the largest contiguous land empire in history. It would reshape trade routes, political boundaries, and cultural exchanges across Eurasia. The Golden Horde, governed by Jochi's descendants, would be essential to that empire's western reach. But in the empire's official histories, Jochi himself would remain ambiguous. Not villain, not hero, just distant. The son who was sent west and never came back. The commander who hesitated at the wrong moment. The father of Khans who were powerful but never quite trusted. And in that ambiguity, a lesson was encoded. Not about loyalty or betrayal, about what happens when identity is made conditional, when belonging requires proof, when legitimacy is something granted by others rather than inherent in existence. Jochi lived his entire life trying to prove he was Genghis Khan's son. He governed territories, he commanded armies, he won battles, he administered populations, he built power. But he could never prove the one thing that would have made all the rest unquestionable. And when he stopped trying, when he prioritized his own regional authority over his father's approval, that choice was interpreted as confirmation that he had never really belonged in the first place. He died alone in 1227. His father died alone 6 months later. They never reconciled. The empire they built together continued without them, and history recorded their relationship not as tragedy, but as administrative complication, a succession dispute, a territorial division, a dynasty with an irregular origin, nothing dramatic, nothing personal. Just the mechanism by which power reproduces itself and determines who gets counted and who gets archived as a guest.